Welcome to another edition of Quarantine Catch Up. I'm your host, Tommy Rinaldi, joined by Chris Famularo again and a special guest, Robert Ruszkowski. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
All right, Rob. So we're 3 months into this quarantine, and me and Fam got to catch up last week. What have you been up to this quarantine?
Well, it's been a long 3 months, mainly finishing up with schoolwork. I don't want to tell you the amount of schoolwork that I've done the past 2 weeks, the kind of race to the finish, catching up on semesters worth of assignments and stuff like that, finishing final papers, senior seminar papers, and overnight. But besides that, I've been enjoying myself a little bit, trying to catch up on some Netflix series, some movies, and of course all the different streaming services. So
what have you been watching?
Well, I finally finished BoJack. As you can see, I'm a big fan in his house right now. I watched the last 2 seasons again with my girlfriend. She didn't quite finish it, and just watching it again really gave me a good appreciation for the little foreshadowings that they have and just the character development. I mean, it's one of my favorite shows, if not my favorite show. Just between the writing and the character development and stuff like that, and just the animation too is really great. Between all the Easter eggs and stuff.
Well, that was a big thing that I really talked about to Tommy last time. Was I was just like, you have to get through the final seasons because it just gets better. And there's Tommy had referenced Bring a Horse to Water episode, which, Rob, is something that you and I had talked about after I finished the show, and we both admired that they told the whole story just through the animation and with no dialogue until the very end, just to pull off a joke. But then in the last season alone, I mean, there are so many, last 2 seasons really, there's so many episodes that you can focus on that really highlight the different aspects of what makes BoJack such a good show. I mean, I was so emotional after the final season that it's just like,
oh yeah,
I was amazed by what they were able to bring out of me emotionally, as well as what I could, really appreciate from the show.
Such an amazing voice cast. I mean, of course, Will Arnett, voicing BoJack, but also BoJack's father at times. And then the writers are always incredible. And of course, the creator, Raphael Bober-Exberg, he's doing some other projects now for Amazon Prime, and I believe he just came out with the book as well. So he's very creative, and I'm looking forward to see what he's coming up in the next few years.
I know when the season was finishing up, you were holding off for that last episode. Did the last episode, was it everything you dreamed of when you finally watched it?
Yeah, so I don't want to spoil too much for those who haven't watched it yet, but the second to last episode, and basically every season is always like the big episode. Like usually, for a lot of series, it's always the last episode leaves you on a cliffhanger. For BoJack, it's a little different. They kind of it kind of fits the style of the show as well, where it's like something big happens and then you see a little bit of the impact of it. But the second to last episode of the final season was, of course, one of the greatest episodes of television that I've seen. And I was just so afraid to watch the last episode for a couple of reasons, obviously because something that has to do with that episode, but just more like I didn't want to be disappointed. Kind of like that Game of Thrones feeling where you watch the last season, you're just like, oh man, like I almost wish that I never saw that, I would have been fine without it. But I think the last episode of the final season of BoJack really tied the bow, fit everything together nicely, and just left the series in a good place, And especially for that show, that once you watch all the seasons, you can really appreciate the ending more. It's not the ending that some fans probably wanted, especially if it's not your favorite series. But once you really appreciate, all the intricate details and character development, I think it's a really fitting ending for the show.
Well, I think even the way, since they broke down the final season, they broke it into halves, right? They released the first 8,
the first time for them.
They released the second 8 later on down the road. And a lot of people, me included, I wasn't huge on the first half of the last season because it kind of felt like they were kind of tiptoeing around a lot of subjects and they were not super connected for what they were going for. And then usually the last 2 episodes, like you said, really hone in on what they're going for. And then they left you on a pretty big cliffhanger for that first half of the season.
Yeah.
But I mean, you watched it when they did the first half and the second half. So I watched it when the whole season was out. So there was no break for me in between. So that I feel like probably gave me a bit of a different viewing experience than it did for you or anyone who watched it when they had come out, when they were first released. And then the second half of season 6 is just, it's so incredible. And I just can't say enough good things about those final 2 episodes of that final season. It's just so perfectly done. And I would agree that second to last episode is probably like one of my favorite all-time episodes when it comes to TV. It's just so incredible, and it's emotional, and it just is firing on all cylinders in the best way.
Yeah, it gave me goosebumps, and it still does. Even talking about it now, and I'm probably going to rewatch that episode later on just because it's so incredible. And Tommy, I mean, I know you didn't exactly watch it yet, but you got to do it whenever you can. It's a bit of a commitment, and you got to make sure you time it out because it can get a little dark
Get
at
heavy.
times. But
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
Tommy
heavy.
watches Black Mirror one after another, so I think he can handle it. But yeah, I would agree. You need to watch it.
I definitely will. You guys were speaking to how you guys watch it a little differently. Rob, you had to wait for certain things to come out, and Fam, you kind of watched it all the way through. That's kind of how I felt when I was watching Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad had a similar ending where the last season was split into two, and I caught up for the second half of the last season. So I binged everything before that, and then I had to wait week to week. How do you feel your experience might have differed if you watched it the other way, Fam, and then for you, Rob, if you got to watch it all the way through, no breaks, and then Fam, for you, having to wait that extra time to watch the second half of the last season?
Well, for me, honestly, I don't know how much it would have changed my feeling overall for the show.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might have appreciated a little bit more of the time in between seasons, so that stuff could kind of sit with me, because some of the actions that happened earlier on in the show, like BoJack's Oscar run and him kind of finding himself, especially in the later seasons, if I had the time, like that whole year in between for seasons, I think I probably would have ended up watching the show again just to keep up with it. But honestly, I think the show succeeds so well being able to watch it, in a handful of sittings, or even if you're that dedicated, you could probably finish BoJack in like a long weekend if you really only did that. But I don't think there's a bad way to watch BoJack, whether split between time or in one long session.
Rob, I know you're very detail oriented when you watch your shows. I know you like to look at the little Easter eggs and watch back to see like the tickers that they have at the bottom or background characters and everything like that. So what about you?
Yeah, so just building off what Fam said, but for me, when I first watched the show, I usually only do 2 episodes at a time, maybe 1 episode like a day, just to kind of savor it. And I was always afraid of, like, when there's no episodes left, like, how am I going to feel, So I was never really one for binging. I never really binge shows. I've been doing it more recently with some other shows that we might be able to get into. But for BoJack, I always really wanted to savor it. And like you were saying, because there's so many Easter eggs and so many little details, background characters, animal puns, of course. I always found myself rewinding it 20 seconds to watch, a minute, then rewinding it again, and then before you know it, a 25-minute episode could take like a 40 minutes for me at times. So I really took my time with it. But watching it again, like kind of all in one sitting with my girlfriend, I really was able to still appreciate it. Obviously not being able to catch all the Easter eggs, but just for appreciating it for what it is. And I think it's telling of just the streaming industry in general, because some types of shows you can and you're supposed to watch it all in one sitting, when there's a launch of an entire season or entire group of episodes all at the same time, and then basically everyone on social media is watching the same 10 episodes all in one weekend. And then there's other series, like The Mandalorian and stuff like that, where it comes out episodic, week by week, of course, with Michael Jordan, The Last Dance and stuff like that. I mean, that was 2 times per week, but you could really see the rise and fall in popularity in social media. But for me, I mean, of course, I should say that when I started watching BoJack, I think they announced season 5, so I was able to catch up on the first 4 seasons, rather quickly, and then catch season 5 just as it was coming out. So I really only had to wait for season 6, and then of course the few-month hiatus between the first and second parts. But it definitely gives you a different viewing experience. But unlike other shows, there's not really need to catch up, and they usually don't. Actually, they never start the show with previously on, like some other series and stuff like that. But that's kind of tuned to the the rise of streaming and stuff like that, where you can go back and watch something or look it up, obviously online, if you don't remember a reference. But for BoJack, I think it can be viewed both ways, which is why it makes itself such a good show.
Yeah, of course. That's definitely one of the shows I need to catch up on. And Another show that came out recently on Netflix is Avatar: The Last Airbender, and
Of
I actually
course.
never got to see that as a kid, and I know
Really?
everybody raves about that show. Um, have you guys watched it? Are you guys watching it now as it's coming back out?
Well, I have actually really not been watching much after last week's episode that we recorded. I've only been really watching a lot of YouTube.
Hmm.
Um, but I do plan on watching Avatar again. I'm actually a little bit afraid because I have such like rose-colored glasses for that show and such nostalgia because I remember watching the premiere of that show. That's one of the few shows I remember as a kid watching the premiere. I was down in Florida with my cousins and we watched the first episode, and I have watched the entirety of that show. I think it's amazing. It's one of my favorite shows from my childhood. But I'm a little bit worried now to kind of go back to it as an adult and see if I still enjoy it because maybe I might have a different sense of appreciation for stuff like that, or maybe I'll love it again, the whole way through. Um, but I've also seen Legend of Korra, which is a sequel to that show,
Hmm.
and that show's amazing. Both of the
Really?
both of the shows are incredible. But the Legend of Korra, really hammered home the mythos of that world and that universe and the world of avatars. So I'm really excited to kind of see how I appreciate Avatar: The Last Airbender as an adult and see if I still find it just as funny because I remember it being a funny show as well as having really good action and really good emotion. But now I'm very interested to see if I'll appreciate it as much as an adult.
I
Rob?
understand what you're saying, fam, because I watched it as well as a kid. But to be honest, I think I was watching it, but I wasn't really watching it. I would just see the episodes go by and be excited at the adventure of it, but I never really appreciated it. And I've watched a few episodes so far with my girlfriend. It's by far her favorite animation and maybe even one of her favorite shows of all time. So going through it episode by episode and really remembering some things like, oh, I remember that character, but then understanding the significance of it. But I do understand what you're saying that like there's just so much nostalgia in it, and there's so much hype around it and so much expectations because it's winning. I just read that it won a Peabody Award back in the late 2000s, which is obviously incredible for an animation show, but it's just setting the bar so high. But I think that Avatar can fulfill it. I haven't watched Korra, but I've heard great things about it. It kind of really expands the universe, like you were saying, builds on some Easter eggs, builds on some characters. So hopefully, throughout the summer, I'll be able to chip away at it and really just watch them all and get a better appreciation for it. Because already I'm seeing that it is a great show. So and understanding all the characters as well. Because some of the things I saw as a kid, like I was disappointed and like, Aang should have beat him up or something like that. Or Aang should absolutely use all his powers. But it's not always like that. There's much deeper meaning behind the show. So.
Yeah, I think now it's that's what I really appreciate a lot about streaming services is when they bring back kind of those shows as kids, and being an adult you get to really understand and appreciate the messaging that you might not, mentally have been able to comprehend as a kid. And I remember I've watched a couple of of episodes or clips that are on YouTube or something like that when I wanted to see it. They're like Uncle Iroh is one of the most like philosophically wise characters in that whole show, and he's supposed to be basically a mentor not just to the kids in the show, but he's also the viewers are supposed to be the ones that look up to him for why peace is better than war and why it's understanding to have compassion for your enemy and wanting to grow and stuff like that. So I'm excited to see what I take out from the show now and how I can comprehend the messages that the creators of that show were trying to bring out in the world. And I think it's a show that a lot of people should watch. And now that I've gotten into anime and really wanting to understand different avenues, like that show is a perfect Western anime in the same in the same realm of the Pokemon that were created later on, not the original Pokemon because that was an anime, but the later Pokemon that were then created for American audiences and stuff like that. Like that's or Samurai Jack is another good one. That's like
Great
those are
show.
the type of shows that I think as children you enjoy the action, but you don't comprehend the stakes behind them. Now I think as an adult you can understand that the action isn't the only important thing. You also need to get the message from why people are fighting or what people are fighting for. And I think the show probably does an incredible job of it.
Yeah, and Avatar really stands the test of time in terms of the symbolism. I mean, obviously being released in the mid 2000s, around 2007, 2008, I think it reached the height of its popularity. But it really is still very symbolic and still very relevant, obviously in 2020, as we approach the new decade and stuff like that. The whole thing with the Fire Nation, the water tribes and stuff like that. It's just, you can really connect the symbols and the parallels to today's modern world, comparing, with the world of Avatar that, of course is fictional, but so many of the characters and so much of their characteristics as well, you can definitely see in today's society. So I think that's really important.
Last week, we were talking about how cartoons sometimes have the ability to show you something that reality or live action shows or movies can't. I don't know if any of you watched the live action version of Avatar, but obviously it didn't translate as well. Rob, I would like to get your thoughts of how you think cartoons are able to transcend what live action can do and make it its own as well.
That's an interesting question, and thank you for reminding us of Avatar, because that's a movie I like to forget. But and that Shyamalan did his best, but of course, yeah. So I think cartoon worlds are just able to. It's interesting because I don't think I ever thought about it really like that, but they're able to just transcend reality. And I know that's kind of a cheap answer at times, but of course the characters, don't have to age if the creators don't want it. So it kind of gives the creators and stuff like that the ability to just have this timeless piece. I mean, of course, not the same, but you look at SpongeBob. I mean, that's been going on for 25 years, and theoretically he hasn't aged today. So you're able to just use a different medium and stuff like that. But in terms of Avatar, you're just able to create a fantasy world where people obviously know that it's not real, but they have the same feelings and the same emotions of that. Obviously there's no flying bison or water bending. As much as we would love to all be earth and fire benders and stuff like that as kids, of course it's not real. But I think the messages are really what what's able to connect with audiences. I don't know if we were talking about before. I think the really great cartoons and animations are the ones that can connect with all age groups, because obviously targeting like a child audience, but then being able to rewatch as teenagers, adults, and then even older, and being able to really connect with the messages throughout life. But the difference from live action, I think that I'm not too sure. There's just something I think nostalgic about animation as well, that you're able to look back on. You could try to replicate it, through your own drawings, through your own fan fiction type of stuff as well. Whereas live action, it's obviously much tougher to go out and film it and do it in real life, and it's obviously much easier to draw your own and try to create your own world out of it.
I think there's also a sense of, like, just from the get-go, a sense of acceptance that the viewer is okay with when it comes to animation. Usually animations start out with slowly introducing the world building of that world, and then you kind of understand when you get later on into the show. You're like, all right, I already have this base knowledge of what is and is not okay, so then I can use that to base my understandings for what happens later. When you get a lot of not real, but live action adaptations of animation. I mean, the greatest example I can come up with is most recently The Lion King from the summer. That's like the most renowned animated movie, I think, of all time when it comes to its storytelling and using characters' faces to express emotion. The biggest gripe everybody had was that the animals were too real, or in the sense of they were not emotional enough. Like, they didn't convey that what they were trying to say, so it made it hard for people to understand why lions would be running around singing and dancing, and animals would be singing all these songs and stuff like that. So I think what happens with animation, and maybe what Rob was trying to get at, is it's almost easier to accept your perception of what is normal, when in live action, you could easily gripe as to what is capable of happening and what is not capable of happening.
Yeah, I agree with that, and thank you for putting it into better words. But even as you were talking, I was able to think, like, in terms of the uncanny valley, you're much more accepting of stuff in animation. Of course, if Aang's eyes are proportionally bigger than his body, it's obviously okay, because that you're watching a cartoon, that you're watching an animation. But if stuff like that, it doesn't really translate well to the movies or live action, of course. I think the one example I'm thinking of is like Alita Battle Angel, where they tried to do something like that. And even then, like, some viewers are really put off with that. Of course, there's stuff like Sonic where, you think it would be simple to almost animate a timeless, cartoon like that. But of course, everyone had problems with the rendition of that. But in cartoons, you're able to accept what they look like and kind of focus more on the story. Whereas, of course, for live action, it's much tougher to, obviously accept the flaws and stuff like that.
With Disney Plus being out and that being somewhat of a cultural phenomenon, you get to rewatch those old movies, those classics like Lion King, Aladdin. When that came out, I thought that was actually a very good remake. Then there's movies like Inside Out, which is just animation, but you still get those deeper themes that you get from something like Avatar or from BoJack. I mean, in a different way, but you still get those deeper themes. Have you guys been watching Disney Plus throughout quarantine or even a little bit before that?
Nope. The only thing I watched on Disney Plus was The Mandalorian. That was literally the reason that I got Disney Plus. As soon as that ended, I did not open the app for like probably 2 months. And then the only time I did was to watch whatever movies were no longer on Netflix that I wanted to watch, like Inside Out or Incredibles 2 or the original Incredibles, or the original Avatar, not the original Avatar, Avatar the movie, not related to Avatar the Last Airbender. But no, I'm not a huge, big Disney Plus, kind of huge fan of it. I'll watch some of it. Like I'll go to watch Hercules, maybe. That's about it. Like it's not that big of a thing for me, really. I'd prefer Hulu or Netflix.
Rob?
Believe it or not, I actually just I finally caved in and bought Disney Plus. Obviously, once again, mentioning my girlfriend, shout out Amanda. She's a huge Disney fan, so she's actually introduced me to a lot of new movies and stuff like that aren't necessarily new, but I haven't seen for the first time. I mean, you guys both mentioned it, but Inside Out, that's not something I haven't seen that until a couple months ago, and really, I don't know why I waited so long because it's
movie's awesome.
It's
one of my
such
favorite
a great film. Shout out Pete Docter too, but he's such an incredible director between that and Up. But I've also been rewatching some of the classics, Mulan and Hercules, like you guys were saying. And once again, obviously thinking I was such a huge fan of them as a kid, watching them all the time. I never really understanding the plot, never really understanding, the significance of Mulan and stuff like that, and obviously with the cultural significance of it too. But then also exploring some others, like of course Mulan 2 and stuff like that. I haven't gotten to the deep into the library yet. Of course, there's hundreds of series and movies, and now with Fox and National Geographic and Marvel and stuff like that, and Star Wars as well. There's obviously a lot to unfold. I'm planning a movie marathon for later in the summer. I'm going to try to get through all the Star Wars movies, and maybe even some of the Marvel ones as well. But it's nice to kind of look back on like we were saying before, look back on some of the nostalgic films and shows of when we were a kid. And thankfully Disney Plus is putting it all together. Although we'll have to see how many streaming services come out, and when it becomes too much.
Yeah, of course. I've been watching Peter Pan. I've been going back to what I had on VHS tapes way back when, and sadly we got rid of all of them. But thankfully, Disney Plus is there to rejuvenate that childhood watching experience that I had as a kid. And I got to watch Parent Trap and a bunch of other movies that I really loved. Going back to what we watched as kids, I know, Rob, you're a big fan of the WWE growing up, and so was I. I kind of have somewhat of a wrestling shirt going on here. Have you been watching the recent matches that have no crowds and really been interesting pay-per-views and Raw and SmackDowns?
Believe it or not, a little bit. And it's more so I kind of got tricked into it. I kind of tricked myself into doing it because, of course, with no sports around, I mean, we were looking for anything and everything. I mean, we're watching the Korean Baseball League now. I actually stayed up to watch a couple games, just anything sports related, anything that, Americans can cheer for. So I was really fascinated to see how WWE was going to use, was going to have their shows without crowds. So I tuned into just an episode just to see, from a media perspective, how they were doing it, how they solved a couple of things. And then it was right around the time that WrestleMania was coming up, and they were promoting, sign up for a free trial and get WrestleMania. And I was like, that's something that I remember paying like $60-$70 for
Exactly.
pay-per-view when I was
for
a
just
kid.
$9.99.
Yeah, all I have to do for free, you get a
Yeah.
month free. So all you have to do is just give your email. So I was like, sure. I watched it, and most of the wrestlers I didn't remember. Of course, John Cena is always going to be there, but it was interesting to see how they've expanded to the times and stuff like that. And then I kind of stuck with it for a little bit, and then Money in the Bank was the month after, and of course
Yeah.
that was always like the most exciting match of the year. And then they actually had it like at their national headquarters, which is in Connecticut. I've driven
Yes.
by it a couple of times, so
Mm-hmm.
I was interested to see how that was going to do. So I kind of paid the $9.99 for that month to see, and I was slowly but surely starting to get a little bit hooked on it. I ordered a new WWE game
There you
to
go.
remind myself, because I only had them on the Wii. I'm like, I can't dig up the Wii now, so I got a cheap one for PlayStation. Now I'm gonna unbox it and see how that goes. But slowly but surely, I think they got me hooked again. But we'll see. It's become interesting, and you have to appreciate it for what it is. Kind of like a form of entertainment, almost like a stylistic, fighting dance routine. But it's fascinating, especially from a media perspective, to see how it's become so popular, and especially how they're still, going on while all the other sports leagues are negotiating contracts and, arguing over, what the timetable might be and how they might come back. But WWE has obviously, been able to find a way.
Obviously, with everything going on, you can't have crowds and everything. And a lot of the wrestlers really feed off what the crowd responds to. So how do you think watching the matches that have come out recently, how has that affected the viewing experience as a fan?
It's been different, of course, obviously with no fans, it's a lot different because, like you were saying, wrestling does depend on the fans, reactions, and wrestlers often, they cut their promos, they call it, just based on crowd's reactions. They want to be booed, they want to be cheered for, and of course, having no one there is very odd. I mean, there's been some times where you can see it's very awkward, and the wrestlers are pretty uncomfortable, but of course, there's other times where it enhances the experience because you can really hear what the fighters are talking about. And not to compare it to UFC, but with the recent UFC fight, you actually saw something where the two fighters were speaking to each other during the fight. And that's something that happens all the time, but we as fans don't know it because you can't hear it over the crowd. So it's actually added a new element to it. Although, of course, I'm sure WWE and the wrestlers and, obviously Vince McMahon they can't wait for the fans to come back and to get that form of revenue. But they've been doing, I think, a pretty good job of, of holding on while there's no fans, and while different states and different governors declare their rules and stuff like that. They've been able to still find a way, like I was saying before.
If you're enjoying what you've been watching with WWE, there's two things I could definitely recommend to you.
Okay.
On WWE Network, there is The Last Ride, which is The Undertaker's essentially The
I
Last
think they're up
Dance.
to episode 3, yeah, and it was like The Last Dance, like you mentioned. Sorry to interrupt, but they're doing it, one episode by one episode. So it'll be interesting to see, how people react to that, and if it results in more subscriptions as opposed to obviously The Last Dance coming out for free on ESPN.
Yeah, and so far so good. He's obviously one of the best superstars that the WWE has had in its entire history, and getting to see the behind the scenes of what they're actually doing, it's great. And another series is on Vice. It's called Dark Side of the Ring, and you get, again, behind the scenes of things that happened in the past, like the Montreal Screwjob with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. The most recent episode was about Owen Hart and his tragic death during a live pay-per-view. If you've been enjoying the WWE content, I'd very much recommend both of those series.
I'll check them out. And it's funny because I've been looking up more of the history, even events that happened when I was a kid, kind of watching it, not really understanding, once again, the significance, or being like, oh, that's why that, guy never came back, or, oh, that's why, stuff like that happened. So it's been interesting to kind of, go back and, and even look at some of the old matches, that I used to appreciate, and then seeing, how they've withstood the test of time.
Rob, I know you've been watching a bunch of WWE and a bunch of other streaming services. What have you been watching other than those?
Well, another Netflix series that I actually just finished last night is End of the Effing World. Season 2 came out a little while back. I watched season 1, I believe it was last year. And that's like a really interesting, series that I kind of fell on. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but it's like
I watched the first season as well, and it was weird, but it was something
yeah,
new, and I really enjoyed something more original coming out, and something where we've been getting sequels and very close riff off of each other. So this was something original, and I enjoyed the first season. I just haven't watched the second one yet.
yeah. So for Fem and for everyone else out there, it's kind of like a British dark drama comedy type of thing. It's about two teenagers that come together. They kind of run away, and they're just obviously coming from two different perspectives. Rough family life and stuff like that. But they're just trying to come together and exist in this crazy world and stuff like that. Obviously, being a British show, it's a little bit different style than American, but I think that it has some really good aspects to it. I think the soundtrack is what really drew me in. How some of the lyrics can really attribute to what's going on screen, almost like an Edgar Wright film to some extent, but obviously being much darker. And another thing too is just their use of voiceovers and kind of what's reality, what's inside their heads. It's originally adapted from a graphic novel, which I started reading a while back as well. And you can almost see aspects of that, almost like how what would be included in a speech bubble versus a thought bubble, how different comic panels can be attributed. It's not so much like Watchmen or something that's like Scott Pilgrim that's like you can really tell that it's from a graphic novel. But the idea itself, I'm really happy to see how they kind of took that and ran with it, because I think the show itself has become much more popular than the graphic novel. And obviously season 2, I think, is completely its own standalone story. So, just seeing how there was a season 2 and how they're able to continue it, because not to spoil anything again, but it was one of those endings where it's like, okay, you could definitely end the show here. I could see it being that. But then reading some articles, seeing how they kind of made that ending a beginning to a new story, and seeing how they continued it for 8 more episodes. And I think that it's one of the best shows in terms of building tension and anticipation, and with dramatic irony, the audience knowing something that the characters don't, and just how they reveal things to you, when they want to. They do some flashbacks, they do some, 2 hours earlier type of stuff. So I think that it's really worth it. But once again, it's another one of those shows that you should really be happy when you're watching it, because it can bring you down a bit.
Yeah, for sure. The main character is a little bit of either a sociopath or a psychopath.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's what it's described as.
The thoughts that he has in his head, and then finding someone that matches it, but not to the full extent.
It's really compliments it,
Yeah,
she kind of fascinating.
Yeah, they have a really interesting dynamic, and watching that play out through the first season was very interesting. Do you recommend the second season?
I would.
Higher than the first season, or
I really enjoyed the second season, and once again, I feel like it ends at a point where they can end it. Some people want a season 3, but I think it builds off of it, because I read something that season 1 is about running away, and then season 2 is about coming together. Almost like this the 6th season of BoJack, where he kind of needs to I don't want to say pay for his crimes, but things have consequences and and circumstances and stuff like that. So it's really season 2 is a reaction to season 1 while still building off of all the characters and stuff like that. And you see them a little bit older and a little bit more mature as well, as they deal with some obviously new problems.
A lot of this reminds me of Barry season 1 and 2.
I haven't been able to watch that, but that's definitely on my list.
You need to. That was actually something I wanted to bring up back when we were talking about watching things, as they release, or watching them all in one sitting. Because Tommy and I watched Barry season 1 basically in 2 sittings, and then we watched season 2 as it released. And that, like, Barry season 1 is all about finding your passion as well as trying to go along with what you think is normal, and then season 2 is kind of building off of that, but then also continuing off of the struggle of what was happening earlier on in the show, like what makes someone a good person or a bad person, and can people change, and are people able to find their true meaning in themselves later on in life. So I'm sure I would enjoy End of the Effing World, but Rob, you definitely should watch Barry.
Well, Bill Hader is a genius, so I'm sure anything that he
Well, him and Liz Sarnoff on that show are just incredible, between the writing and the actual acting of the show. It's just so well done.
And what platform is it on? What
it's HBO.
HBO, okay.
So,
well, actually, a Showtime series that I've also been watching is Kidding, starring Jim Carrey. It's his return to television. I just finished season 2 a little while back. Obviously seeing season 1 coming out last year. And that's one of those shows that it's episodic, so it's week by week. But I actually found it about halfway through, so kind of like we were discussing before, I was able to binge the first few episodes and then only have to wait for the last few. But it does give you a recap at the beginning of the episodes. But I think that's another really great show. And I've come to be drawn to those types of shows within a show, almost like BoJack, like some other things too, where it's kind of a commentary on the industry itself. And I think Jim Carrey, I mean, I don't say he was born to play the role, but especially seeing Jim Carrey, adapt and, his I guess the new Jim Carrey and stuff like that, very political and just really satirical and just, creating a commentary. I think that this was a really good show for him.
Yeah, I watched the most recent Hollywood Reporter close-up roundtable with all the comedy actors, and it was only from like 3 months ago or something like that. And he was on it alongside of a number of incredible comedy actors, like Ted Danson was on there, and there was another actor from Veep. And speaking of Barry, what is his name? He was the Fonz, and he played
Henry Winkler.
Yeah, Henry Winkler was on it. So it was interesting to see
Those are
Jim
some legends,
Carrey. You should watch it. It's like 48 minutes. It's amazing to kind of see how these guys bounce off of each other. But it was so interesting to see Jim Carrey talk about kidding and talk about how he approached the role and how he felt like, because what I was able to grab from what he was talking about, it's a show about a man who works on a kid's show but wants to start dealing with the death of his son and trying to use that platform to reach that means as a sense of understanding. And just seeing how he talked about, his super infamous days of the 90s and his very facial acting and his expressive acting in comparison to what he does now, and how he's able to express himself not only through acting, but he's a well-known painter and he's very expressive in how he feels. So it's just really interesting to see Jim Carrey in that kind of vivacious expression of himself.
Yeah, Jim Carrey is one to delve into his roles. When he did Truman Show, when he did Man on the Moon, they came out with the documentary Jim and Andy, and how he really becomes Andy Kaufman, and Jim wasn't on set and all this other stuff. And when you see his interviews about kidding, a lot of people are getting concerned about Jim Carrey, thinking he's going crazy, but that's him living his character outside of the TV world and bringing it into his real world. And it kind of gives you a taste of what Mr. Pickles, I believe is his character's name, gives you a taste of what he's going through as a character and bringing that into his real life interviews. I thought that was really interesting. And kidding, just like all the shows we really mentioned today, has a lot of deeper things that you don't really think about. I believe the show's made by Michel Gondry, who I believe made Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey back in 2004.
That I'm not sure, but it would make sense. I believe there's a few producers and writers that he's worked with before, obviously. It took a lot to bring him back to television, especially. I think this is his first television show since In Living Color. So obviously 2 completely different programs, and
for sure,
that's be something that really attracted him.
Yeah, I think working with someone that you're comfortable with in Michel Gondry, that he got to feel something new again. Like this, a lot of actors that have a lot of experience, they really look for something that interests them. Tom Hardy's only doing stuff that he's had a part in and is really interested in. Once you have that acclaim, you're able to seek out things instead of just getting whatever comes into the mail, And I think Jim Carrey did a really good job of expanding on that and executing on that with this show. Just like I asked for the last show we talked about, do you think season 2 was better than season 1?
It's hard to say better. It really built off of the world they created in season 1. I think I did like season 1 better just in terms of nostalgia and stuff like that. And it once again, I believe it could have been a standalone. I believe the show is made for two seasons though, because I think, not to spoil anything again, but I think season 2 really ends just where it's supposed to. They could expand on it, but I think it was almost like a part 1, part 2 type of thing. But I really enjoyed, season 1, part 1, because just exploring it and being revealed to things as they come, and just seeing that relationship and kind of the build up, I think was done a little bit better. Although season 2 definitely had some more had a lot of guest actors too, a lot of famous celebrities that you might not expect. There was Blake Griffin was there. Ariana Grande was in an episode, which just insane because that's obviously at one of the height of her popularity. But a lot of other guest stars coming as well. So.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Anything else that you've been enjoying during quarantine? I know Fam's a big fan of video games. What about you?
Yeah, so obviously having some more free time now that school's over, and obviously with isolation and all that stuff, I've been tracing back to my roots. Some of my favorite games like Assassin's Creed. There's so many of them. I'm still trying to catch up between the Egyptian one with Origins and the Greek one, Odyssey, and then they just announced the new one. I'm not sure if you guys saw, but
Valhalla, right?
Valhalla,
Yeah.
which is going to be insane. Once again, I'm a huge Viking guy. My girlfriend loves the Vikings, so. That'll definitely be something that we'll see if we can play together, kind of create your own story now that they've delved into the RPG type of thing. But I'm very excited for that, and we'll see, what happens with the next generation of consoles, as those are also expected to come out, this holiday season with the PS5 and the next wave of Xbox. So it'll be interesting. I have my fingers crossed for it. Assassin's Creed has really, exceeded the bar sometimes, and they've really come to disappoint. To be quite honest, with some glitchy games or some weaker stories. So we'll have to see what this new one comes out. But for me, I'm excited for it either way.
I think the new breed of Assassin's Creed, really starting with Origins and then going to Odyssey and now with Valhalla, I think they've kind of redefined themselves past what they started out as their series. I mean, my sister she most recently got Odyssey because she also plays on Xbox and she loves it. She has so many good things to say about it. So it really sounds like they've kind of transitioned with the times, which is what you would hope for from a video game company. Is they saw that they kind of ran the track with the original style of Assassin's Creed, and they've opened their world up and they've made it a little bit more RPG-esque than the previous ones. I mean, I got into the series because of Assassin's Creed 2 and basically the whole Ezio. The whole Ezio trilogy was what sold me on the series. I actually never played Assassin's Creed 1.
I started, but I never finished because there's really no need to. 2 explained almost everything.
2 did everything. And then Assassin's Creed 3 came out. I actually enjoyed it, but I know it was a big letdown for a lot of people. And then
I had mixed feelings about that one.
I actually never played Black Flag, which is what a lot of people really enjoyed. That was like
that one was fun, and
I think it started
one. Yeah, it started the new breed as well. I think, and not quite as defining as the transition, but in terms of going, using sailing, because then obviously a few others came out of that one. Like Rogue and stuff like that, where
Rogue and Syndicate and
aspect.
Some of the other ones weren't as good. But in the same vein, like in the same combat style, I've actually been playing the Arkham games, the remasters of the first 2 Batman Arkham games. So I got Arkham Asylum. I actually beat that in like 2 days. Game is because I originally played Arkham City first, had never played Asylum. So when this, I got this deal to get Arkham Asylum remastered, City remastered, and then the original release of Night, I was super excited to play them. Arkham Asylum is good, but it's nowhere near what Arkham City is. Arkham City is
I
incredible.
Definitely the best of the 3.
I'm in City right now. It's beautiful on the Xbox One X. I think they did a great job on the remaster. The combat's just as fun as I remember, and I'm really excited to play Arkham Knight for the first time. It should be a very interesting playthrough. But other than that, I've been playing Call of Duty and Stardew Valley with my friends. That's what I've been doing.
With the Arkham games, they definitely defined what hand-to-hand combat could be within video games. I feel
I would say Assassin's Creed did it first.
Okay.
Because Rocksteady came out of some of the developers from Assassin's Creed, but I would say that the Arkham games really made it a staple when it came to that open world hand-to-hand combat.
Because Spider-Man for PlayStation had a similar play style, similar move sets and everything, just with Spider-Man stuff.
It's the same combat,
and it's great.
Yeah, I agree. That game and God of War and Last of Us are the reasons why I've contemplated getting a PlayStation 4.
Highly recommend it.
But I'm not going to dish out that money right now.
Oh yeah,
but
I understand.
The Arkham games are great. I mean, in a similar vein, I almost kind of wish that there was a Skyrim world for that kind of style of combat. I mean, there's the Shadow of Mordor games, which are set in the Lord of the Rings, but I was never a big Lord of the Rings fan. Like, I didn't kind of really grasp onto that. But I wish there was a world like that Elder Scrolls delivers, where you could have that style of combat that you find in Assassin's Creed or in the Arkham games. But hopefully with Valhalla coming out, they'll be able to deliver something like that. You know, it's similar to the Norse mythology and the similar combat style and time, place, time period. So hopefully that's what you can get from it.
Going off of everything that we've been talking about, we're cutting it a little long. So one last thing I would like to talk about is, Rob, last episode we got to talk about music for a length. What have you been indulging when it comes to music?
I've been indulging in a few things. So obviously with the summer coming up, I had some pretty big summer plans. You know, my family usually loves to go to the summer concert series and stuff like that. We usually, you know, book a few, you know, months in advance and just, you know, have it marked on our calendars, looking forward to it. There's a few that I was really looking forward to. There was the Green Day, Weezer, and who is it? I think Fall Out Boy concert coming in August. There was, I think, like Super Hella Mega Tour, and that was just recently canceled. I was really looking forward to that because I'm a huge fan of all three bands. That was going to be at Citi Field, you know, a huge crowd. And obviously with, you know, the current pandemic, that was canceled. And then my mom is a huge Guns N' Roses fan. We booked the concert coming in July, and then I think that one was just recently canceled as well. And then a few others. You know, we were looking to some festivals, obviously, festivals in September and stuff like that. With I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's in Central Park and stuff like that. But with all those being canceled, so I've been actually doing some virtual concerts. You know, they have them streaming on YouTube. I think there was one from Green Day in Barcelona. There was the Red Hot Chili Peppers that was just on. I believe it was last night or a few days ago. So I've been, you know, watching them on the big screen in my living room, just kind of, you know, pretending I was there in person. But I've also been developing a really extensive Spotify playlist. So every few years or so, I kind of transition from the new medium of music to, you know, to the next one. So first started with like the iPod shuffle and trying to get everything on CDs and getting everything on CDs into the iTunes library, and now getting everything on the iTunes library, you know, onto my phone. And I'm like, you know what? I'll get Spotify. I'll create a massive playlist, and I'll just do that instead of having to buy the new songs or buying the new CDs. I'm currently in the midst of transferring, you know, all my old iPod songs and stuff like that onto a Spotify playlist. I think I have almost like 2,500 songs right now, so it's quite a lot. But I'm gonna be proud of it when it's over. So that's what I've been listening to, kind of all the old songs and the old bands that I've grown up with.
Those are some good live concerts. A lot of people have been doing Instagram lives and YouTube live, like you're saying,
and even
and it's been Fortnite concert with Travis Scott. There's been a lot of ways to still entertain yourself. I know NPR has been doing their Tiny Desk concerts from home and everything like that. Those have been very entertaining. Thankfully, we could still all come together through music, and thankfully through this show, we've all come together to catch up. This will do it for today's episode. I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you guys talking to me. If you could like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. We will have your social media somewhere in the bottom over there. Rob, where can they find you?
Oh, they can find me everywhere. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm not on OnlyFans yet, but I'll let you guys know. I had to pull a Rob comment somewhere in the show.
Yeah, that's fine. That's all I needed.
I can't wait for the Robert Ruszkowski OnlyFans.
Oh, you know what? It's coming. You can also find me on Joe Schmideggi on Twitter.
Oh, perfect.
And I don't have a MySpace though. So.
That's okay. Shout out to all the Schmigeggis out there. You're very important to all of us.
Me up on Snapchat too, you know?
Hopefully we'll have another Schmideggi on the show at some point.
I would love to have another Schmideggi on the show. Chris, I know we can find you at Chris Famularo, and for me, you can find me at TJ Rinaldi for more updates about One Shot. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.